Los Angeles, 1985. In the smoke-filled air of the Whisky A-Go-Go, two generations of heavy metal were about to collide. When Lemmy Kilmister stepped onto the stage, a voice rose from the crowd. "Thief! You stole from Metallica!" 1,200 people held their breath. Lemmy, standing at the microphone stand, slowly placed his Jack Daniels bottle on the table and looked at the man. But the real shock would come when the backstage door swung open. When Lars Ulrich walked in, nobody could predict what would happen next. The words spoken that night would rewrite thrash metal history and cement the bond between Lemmy and Metallica forever. But the roots of this story stretched far deeper than that evening, back to the days when speed and fury began their conquest of heavy metal. If you want to discover the most controversial moments of Lemmy Kilmister's life and illuminate the hidden corners of rock history, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Every week we share unknown stories from the Motorhead legend. Now, let's return to that electric night in 1985. The birth of speed, Motorhead, and the thrash metal revolution. When the Overkill album dropped in 1979, the heavy metal world wasn't ready for anything like it. Lemmy Kilmister was attacking the strings of his Rickenbacker bass so hard and fast that the instrument screamed like an electric guitar. Filthy animal. Taylor's drumsticks were hitting 6 times per second. Fast. Eddie Clarke's distorted guitar was like a lit match thrown onto gasoline. This wasn't just fast music. This was an out-of-control locomotive breaking the sound barrier. Back then, heavy metal still lived in the shadow of Black Sabbath's heavy, doom-laden riffs and Led Zeppelin's blues-based epics. But Motorhead was different. They were fusing punk's madness with metal's power. The intro to Overkill was a tempo explosion that no rock band had dared attempt before. Lemmy used to say in interviews, "We wanted to be the fastest, loudest, and dirtiest band. We had no other goal." When Ace of Spades came out in 1980, Motorhead had become a phenomenon. The album's title track was a 2-minute, 48-second manifesto that shredded listeners' eardrums, accelerated heartbeats, and changed heavy metal's DNA forever. Lemmy's scream of the Ace of Spades became a generation's battle cry. But nobody could have predicted that 5 years later, another band would take this speed revolution even further. Metallica's rise from the Bay Area to the world stage San Francisco Bay Area, 1981. A 17-year-old Danish kid named Lars Ulrich was building a new life in California. But Lars wasn't just another immigrant. He had plans to reinvent heavy metal in his head. The walls of Lars's room were drowning in Motorhead posters. He'd played the Ace of Spades record so many times that the turntable needle had carved deep grooves into the vinyl surface. When Lars met James Hetfield, they both shared the same vision: speed, aggression, and relentless energy. When Metallica formed in 1981, even in their first rehearsal recordings, Motorhead's influence was crystal clear. The drum parts in Hit the Lights were directly inspired by Phil Taylor's Overkill performance. James Hetfield's down-picking technique was the guitar version of Lemmy's bass-playing style. When the Kill 'Em All album hit the market in 1983, the thrash metal movement was officially born. Songs like Seek and Destroy, Whiplash, and Metal Militia took Motorhead's speed philosophy and combined it with more complex riff structures. Debates erupted in the music press. Is Metallica copying Motorhead or evolving it? But Lars Ulrich never hid the bands that influenced him. In a 1984 interview with Kerrang! Magazine, he said, "Without Lemmy, there would be no Metallica. Overkill is like the Bible to me. Before I heard that album, I didn't know metal could be this fast. Still, This open admiration looked like a weakness in some Metallica fans' eyes, especially during the 1984-1985 period, when Metallica was establishing its own identity with the Ride the Lightning album. A group of radical fans believed they needed to completely break away from Motorhead. This debate around the word kill would eventually turn into an obsession. The obsession around the word killing. Thrash metal's identity crisis. By 1985, the thrash metal scene was experiencing an identity crisis. Bands like Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth, and Anthrax were starting to be called the Big Four. But each group was struggling to find its own voice, and in that process, Motorhead's shadow still loomed over them. The word killing was one of thrash metal's obsessive themes. Metallica's album title, Kill 'Em All, was the most obvious example. The lyrics to Seek and Destroy, searching, seek, and destroy. Themes of destruction, killing, domination. Motorhead had the song Overkill. The word overkill literally meant excessive killing. A group of fans and music critics began claiming this similarity wasn't coincidental. Magazines like Kerrang! And Metal Hammer published articles with headlines like, "Did Metallica steal Motorhead's speed formula?" Forums and fanzines were filled with arguments. A group of Motorhead purists branded Metallica as copycats. On the other side, Metallica defenders said, "Being influenced isn't stealing." Lars Ulrich usually gave diplomatic answers to these accusations. "Motorhead is our inspiration, but we make our own music." But tensions among fans kept escalating, especially at concerts in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Fights broke out between fans wearing Motorhead shirts while Metallica was on stage. And then came the summer of 1985. Metallica was working on the Master of Puppets album. Motorhead was preparing to enter the studio for Orgasmatron. Both bands were in Los Angeles, and fate would bring them together at the Whisky, A Go-Go. That night, Whisky, A Go-Go, 1985. It was late July. Los Angeles' Sunset Strip was filled, as always, with leather-jacketed, chain-wearing metalhead kids. The Whisky A Go-Go was hosting Motorhead that evening. Tickets had sold out weeks earlier, but nobody knew that night would become one of thrash metal history's turning points. When Lemmy walked onto the stage, he had his usual charisma. He was approaching 50, but his energy would shame a 20-year-old. The black body of his Rickenbacker bass gleamed under the spotlights. Jack Daniels' bottle in his right hand, microphone in his left. When the intro riff to Ace of Spades kicked in, the crowd went wild. The first three songs went smoothly. Overkill, Bomber, Iron Fist, classics came one after another. But before the fourth song, when Lemmy leaned into the microphone and said, "Now we're gonna play you something new," a voice rose from the back rows of the crowd. "Thief! You stole from Metallica!" Lemmy looked up. His eyes scanned the crowd. The music stopped. Phil Taylor held his drumstick frozen in midair. Eddie Clark turned down his guitar volume. 1,200 people held their breath. Lemmy slowly placed his Jack Daniels bottle on the small table at the edge of the stage. He moved closer to the microphone. His voice filled the entire venue. "Who said that?" The crowd parted. A young man in his mid-20s, long-haired, wearing a Metallica shirt, stepped forward. He had a Budweiser can in his hand. He was drunk, but determined. You stole Metallica's style. The killing theme isn't yours." The walls of the Whisky A Go-Go echoed with this accusation. Some fans started clapping. Some booed. Lemmy just smiled. That cold, ruthless, "Who the hell are you to talk to me?" smile. "Son," Lemmy said, his voice low but sharp, "when were you born?" The young man was confused. "What? What year were you born?" Lemmy repeated. 1960. Lemmy nodded. 1960. So when you were born, I'd already been playing rock and roll for 15 years. We released Overkill in 1979. When did Metallica's first album come out? The young man fell silent. He knew the answer, but didn't want to say it. 1983, Lemmy said. 4 years later. Now tell me again who stole from whom. The crowd roared. Some with laughter, some with applause, but the young man didn't give up. But the killing theme! Metallica made it popular! This time Lemmy actually laughed. A deep, gravelly laugh that smelled of tobacco and whiskey. Son, have you ever listened to Black Sabbath? The song Killing Yourself to Live came out in 1973. Judas Priest's Delivering the Goods in 1979. We all influence each other. That's how music works. Metallica was influenced by us. We were influenced by Black Sabbath. They were influenced by the blues. Nobody's stealing from anybody. We're a family. And right at that moment, the side door of the Whisky A Go-Go opened. 3 people walked in. One was a skinny young man with long blonde hair, full of energy. Lars Ulrich. From backstage to the stage. Lars's entrance. Lars Ulrich was in Los Angeles that night because Metallica had just completed pre-production for the Master of Puppets recordings at Sweet Silence Studios. The band members had returned to the city for a few days of rest. When Lars came to the Whisky A Go-Go to catch the Motorhead show, the security guard at the door recognized him. Lars Ulrich, come in. You gotta see Lemmy. But before Lars went backstage, he'd climbed up to the small balcony next to the bar. From there, he was watching the stage from above the crowd, and when he heard that argument, his face turned bright red. When Lars saw the guy in the Metallica shirt, he felt a surge of anger rise inside him. This man had no right to speak on behalf of Metallica, and his disrespectful address to Lemmy deeply disturbed Lars. Because Lars saw Lemmy not as an idol, but as a teacher. Lars quickly left the balcony, ran down the stairs, and entered through the stage side door. A security guard tried to stop him, but backed off in the face of Lars's determination. When he reached the edge of the stage, Lemmy was still arguing with the guy in the Metallica shirt. Lars walked toward the stage. The spotlights turned on him. The crowd noticed, Lars Ulrich, Metallica. Some applauded, some booed. Lemmy turned, saw Lars. He raised his eyebrows. Lars, what are you doing here? Lars reached for the microphone. Lemmy gave it to him, and Lars turned to the guy in the Metallica shirt. Who the hell are you to speak for Metallica? The young man froze. Seeing Lars Ulrich live had shocked him. I was just... Shut up, Lars said sharply. I'm going to tell you something. And everyone should hear this. He turned to face the crowd. 1,200 eyes locked onto him. Who founded Metallica? Me, James, Cliff, Kirk, and me. And what was I doing before I founded Metallica? I was listening to Motorhead. I heard the Overkill album when I was 17 years old, and my life changed. Lemmy taught me what speed is. He taught me what aggression, energy, and standing on stage without fear of anything means. Lars took a breath. His voice was trembling but determined. Metallica wouldn't exist without Motorhead. That's a fact, and we don't hide it. We say it in every interview. Lemmy is our hero. Stealing? No. We're influenced. We learn. And then we make our own music. That's how rock and roll works. The crowd began to applaud. But Lars wasn't finished yet. He turned to Lemmy. Lemmy, when you released Overkill in 1979, the world wasn't ready. But you didn't care. You turned speed, power, and fury into music. We saw that and said, we can do this too. We can even take it further. But that's not stealing from you. That's continuing your legacy. Lemmy looked at Lars for a long time. Then he slowly smiled. That hard, wise smile. Lars, you're a good kid. Metallica's success is deserved. You guys carved your own path, and that's beautiful. Lars bowed his head. It was a sign of respect. Then he handed the microphone back to Lemmy and stepped to the side of the stage. But Lemmy stopped him. Wait, let's play a song together. Overkill. Come on. Lars's eyes went wide as saucers. What? I'm not the drummer for your songs. Today you are, Lemmy said, and signaled to Phil Taylor. Phil stood up from behind the drum kit. He turned to Lars. Come here, kid. Show us what you got. Lars sat down behind the drum kit. His hands were shaking. This was a moment beyond his wildest dreams. Lemmy leaned into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're doing a special performance. Lars Ulrich from Metallica is gonna play Overkill with us. Are you ready? The roof of the Whisky A Go-Go was about to blow off. The crowd was screaming like crazy. Lemmy signaled to Eddie. The guitar riff started. The deep, metallic, aggressive sound of Lemmy's bass came in, and Lars began playing Phil Taylor's part. The first few seconds felt amateur. Lars was trying to catch the tempo. But then, suddenly, he synced up. The drumsticks started flying through the air. The double bass pedals shook the ground. Lars's face was covered in sweat, but he was smiling. Lemmy looked at him, nodded. That's it. When the song ended, the crowd was on its feet applauding. Lars got up from behind the drum kit and hugged Lemmy. Two men, two generations, on one stage. And that guy in the Metallica shirt had disappeared into the crowd. In shame. The echoes of the debate, the birth of the thrash metal family. What happened that night at the Whisky A Go-Go wasn't just a concert moment. This was one of thrash metal history's most important messages. We are a family. The next day, the music press carried the event to the headlines. Kerrang! Magazine. Lars Ulrich took the stage, played Overkill with Lemmy, thrash metal unity, Metal Hammer, Metallica, and Motorhead, not stealing, learning. Fanzines, forums, fans. Everyone was talking about that night. In the interviews Lars gave over the following weeks, he constantly told that story. In his 1986 interview with RIP magazine, he said, Lemmy taught me that night. In music, respect matters, not competition. Metallica didn't become a copy of Motorhead because we wrote our own story. But without the path Lemmy showed us, that story would never have been written. Lemmy was less sentimental, but enjoyed talking about that night. In his 1987 interview with Metal Forces magazine, Lars is a good drummer. Metallica is a good band. If we taught them something, that's cool. But they earned their own success themselves. I just love speed. They love it too. We all love this music. That's enough. This incident became a turning point in the thrash metal scene. Now the who stole from whom debates between bands diminished. Megadeth's Dave Mustaine, Slayer's Kerry King, Anthrax's Scott Ian all talked about Motorhead's importance in interviews. The big four bands accepted Lemmy as a common ancestor. When Metallica released the And Justice for All album in 1988, the liner notes acknowledgement section included Lemmy's name, to Lemmy, for teaching us speed. When the Black Album sold millions in 1991, Lars said, in an interview, Lemmy has his fingerprints all over every success we've had. This friendship between Motorhead and Metallica continued for years. At Lemmy's 50th birthday concert in 1995, Metallica took the stage and played Overkill together. In 2009, Metallica honored Motorhead with the opening speech at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremony. In his speech, Lars said, Lemmy taught us not just music, but attitude. To not be afraid of anything. To never apologize to anyone. To just play our music. Legacy. The father of speed and his children. When Lemmy died in 2015, Lars Ulrich was one of the first musicians to post a mourning message. In the photo he shared on Instagram, a young Lars was wearing a Motorhead shirt. The message he wrote beneath it: "Lemmy, you taught me everything. Speed, power, courage, honesty. Your spirit is in every note of Metallica. Thank you forever." At Lemmy's funeral, Metallica played Ace of Spades. Lars was crying behind the drum kit. But that day, before going on stage, he told reporters something. In 1985, at the Whisky A Go-Go, Lemmy taught me something. The rock and roll family is built on respect, not competition. We are Lemmy's children, and his legacy will live on in every new generation of metal bands. Today, when thrash metal history is written, the Motorhead and Metallica relationship is held up as the gold standard. The perfect example of how one band can be influenced by another and still find its own unique voice. That absurd debate around the word killing is now a funny anecdote in thrash metal folklore. Because the real story is this: Lemmy created the speed, Metallica developed it, and together they built heavy metal's most powerful subgenre. That guy in the Metallica shirt, years later, wrote this on a forum. In 1985, at the Whisky A Go-Go, I made a fool of myself. Lemmy and Lars gave me the most important lesson that night. Music isn't an ego war, it's a shared passion. Since that day, I've been listening to both Motorhead and Metallica. And I don't ask who stole from whom anymore. I just enjoy the music. This is perhaps the greatest legacy of that night. Heavy metal isn't just noise and fury, it's respect, community, and bridges between generations. Lemmy knew this, Lars learned it, and millions of thrash metal fans understood it after that night. The walls of the Whisky A Go-Go still bear the traces of that evening. Some old fans still tell the story of that argument and Lars's stage entrance. Some exaggerate it, some tell it incompletely. But everyone says the same thing. That night, we witnessed one of thrash metal history's most beautiful moments. Because that night, a fan accused Lemmy. Lemmy educated him. And Lars Ulrich, playing Overkill with his stage hero, showed the whole world this: rock and roll isn't about stealing, it's about sharing.